you know.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Melanie, but thank you to Kit as well. I appreciate that you thought of me and Innovation Works and the portfolio companies that we work with. Very quickly, I'll give you my background. We'll go to Amy. We'll hear a little bit from each of you. We could talk forever about marketing. So we got a lot of content to try to cram in today and answer your questions. And I do want to make this participatory, but we have a pretty good presentation thought out as well for you. So I'm Terri Glueck. I'm the Director of Communications at Innovation Works. I am also the Director of our Community Outreach and Development. Innovation Works is frequently a handoff partner to CMU. We are often the first institutional investors in early stage technology companies. So really from concept stage through scaling up, we help innovation companies, technology companies get to their next stage of growth, no matter where they are on the continuum. We have accelerators, Alpha Lab for software companies, Alpha Lab Gear for hardware companies, and now Alpha Lab Health. We have a seed fund, and then we have a venture fund. So we have a continuum of resources. Amy is shaking her head. She's been with companies that have taken advantage of every program that we've offered. And I think she also has some great wisdom to share. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Thanks so much, Terri. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. It's quite an honor to talk to people who are in entrepreneurial spirit and really following their dreams and their passions. So I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about how do you do marketing, so to speak, which I think a lot of people use as a phrase a lot. And I hope that we have the right content to tee up for you and also answer your questions. But before we get started on that, I want to give you a little bit of background about me. I have 30 years of business-to-business tech marketing experience, large to small companies. I think the largest company I worked for was 120,000 employees, smallest being maybe 4 to 10 employees. So wide range of experience. I think it helps me understand a little bit about what it takes to scale at each level. So unique experience from end to end. Also, you might know some of my most recent experience was with Wombat Security, which is a very successful CMU spin out. We created content, or I should say a platform that actually helped organizations teach their employees how to avoid cyber attack and then had a successful exit to Proofpoint, which was also just recently acquired by Thoma Bravo for $11 billion. So really great experience in both getting a business to a certain point and getting it ready for that next stage of the business's life. Those are all really important things to think about as you continue to really evolve your business. So I'm excited to talk to you today. I'm actually the VP of Marketing for Othot. They are an AI platform for higher education to help higher ed administrators appreciate how to make the most informed decisions about students all the way through their student life cycle, from recruiting all the way through alumni giving back. And so that's the work that I'm doing today when I'm not in front of you wonderful people. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. I can't wait to hear your questions and hopefully answer some of the things you've got top of mind.
Great. Thanks, Terri and Amy. I'm just going to quickly go down through the participant list, and when I call you out, you can unmute and just introduce yourself, maybe one sentence or two about your project that you're working on. And if you have any of your teammates here, you can introduce them at that time too. So Alireza.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alireza Chamanzar. I'm the head of algorithm division at Precision Neuroscopic, which is a CMU spin-off company. And there we develop diagnostic methods for stroke and neural damages in electromagnetic brain injury. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Brian?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Holt, co-founder of BioBind, another CMU spinoff, where we are seeking to create a new treatment for low-level lead poisoning. Team of 4. I don't think anyone else is on the call today, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Chris? Chris Murphy?
Hey, guys. Chris Murphy here. Chris Religion. Murphy, like Eddie Murphy. You guys hear me okay? Yeah, I guess so. I'm here on behalf of Talk to LLC. We are a ADHD self-management company, and I'm joined by my dear brother, Justin Murphy, who you see on the call. And our focus is really to provide, democratize the ability for people to get access to executive function training and other self-management tools that medication doesn't cover when it comes to ADHD treatment. And we're part of VentureBridge, so thanks for having us.
Great, thanks for being here. Dan McDade.
Hey everyone, my name is Dan. I am a co-founder of a startup called Perfetto, which is part of VentureBridge, and we are trying to create a platform that makes it easy for data scientists to deploy, manage, and scale their models in production environments. Excited to be here and excited to talk with everybody.
Great, thank you. Danny.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder at Sea Robotics. We're trying to build underwater robots that can quickly and efficiently inspect and clean the underhull portions of big container ships.
Thank you. Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg Houchins. I'm CEO of Kemet, and we're looking to decarbonize the cement industry by using renewable electricity.
Hital?
Hey everyone, I'm Hital Parekh. I'm the founder of NIS, a company that helps owners and developers find incentives and resources to help them go green. We're a part of the current VentureBridge cohort and excited to be here.
Great, thank you. Jay?
Hi, my name is Jay Reddy, CEO of Advanced Optronics. We're working on surgical sensors for implantable devices with an initial focus on hearing to expand the eligible population for cochlear implants. Thank you.
Thanks. Jody?
Okay. Hi, I'm Jody. I am the CEO of Culture Aura, and we are helping employees fight isolation and build a sense of belonging in their companies, and also helping companies in turn strengthen their culture by making meaningful connections for those employees. We are a member of the VentureBridge program this summer, as a couple of other people on this call, and we also participated in the spring NSF I-Corps program. The rest of my team is not on this call though, so thanks so much.
Thank you. I think, yeah, Justin, okay, Lizanne?
Hi, I'm here on behalf of Zeus Lab. Our founder, Seth Goldstein, is professor at CMU. Zeus Lab boosts communities with a lending and payment platform. It parlays trust and local reputation into capital. Our primary focus now is deploying with small businesses in the Pittsburgh area.
Thank you. Matt?
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Pollowitz. I am co-founder of Equa. We are a mindfulness training technology focused on building resilience and performance mindset in the workforce. It's really exciting to see a couple of different companies here that are focused on mental health and wellness. I'm an incoming innovation fellow. I'm also part of VentureBridge, and I'm excited to get into it today.
Great, thanks. Randy Eager, I'll let you also introduce yourself. He's one of our innovation fellows, entrepreneurs in residence that helps mentor our programs. So, Randy, if you just wanna.
Hey everybody. Yes, I'm a EIR with the Innovation Fellows Group. I worked with Terri for a while, 5 years, I think, as an entrepreneur residence at IW. Fantastic experience, great team, and they help lots of folks. It's great. Amy, you don't know this, but I'm friends of Andy. And when I worked for 5 years at the tech transfer office at CMU, during those 5 years, one of the things I did was create the license deal for Andy for Plextronics. Okay, so
small Pittsburgh world is always
showing
right?
my age, but yes. Also co-founder jumping into something full-time, actually. I'm happy to be doing this. A company called ResTech. It's a little unusual for me, a life sciences play, a medical device that has created the next generation of mobile equipment sterilization in hospitals.
Great. Reed, do you want to just say hello?
Hey everybody, I'm Reed Medical. I work in the technology transfer office where my job is a startup mentor to inventors who are interested in forming companies around university-owned IP.
Let's see. I probably will pronounce this wrong. Jayu?
Hi, I'm sorry. I missed the beginning. Is it a self-introduction?
Yeah, just a brief introduction of you and your project.
Okay, so we're forming this company that's called Aquatonomy. We're developing autonomous underwater vehicles for infrastructure inspection.
Great, thank you. And Yang-sung?
Hello, my name is Yang-sung. I'm a postdoc at Human-Computer Interaction Institute, and I'm the part of the team called Schema. And we're building the future of online decision-making that makes it less stressful and faster to make decisions while enabling everyone to build on each other's work.
Great. And I think I got everyone. I don't think anyone came in after that. So I think we're good. I'll just tell the participants during the presentation, Terri and Amy's presentation, there will be several times that they'll be able to stop and ask for questions. So at that time, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function down at the bottom under the participant list. And then I can just go through the list. And then in the meantime, if you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, we can do that too and probably get back to that later. So it's a couple options there. So I think we're ready to go. So if you want to get started, I don't know if do you have slides or no? Okay.
No, it's all us all the time.
Great. Okay. All right. You can get started. Thanks.
Well, again, I really appreciate spending time with you. We do have a pretty packed set of content, but there is plenty of opportunity for questions because we're here for you. So we want to anticipate what you might need to know, but we also want to answer your questions. Some that came in ahead of time, we'll try to address in one way or another in Amy's and my content, but if you have something else, we'll also try to get to that. So we thought we would have a sort of dialogue with Amy and me for, I don't know, at this point, maybe like 50 minutes or not quite. Then we'll get to more Q&A, and that time will include some Q&A, but we have time set aside for Q&A. And then at the end, we'll probably try to do a little lightning round of anything we've thought of or that we want to make sure that we convey. So we're going to get started. I'm also going to lay out what the sort of blocks are so you know what's coming up next so that we don't get to anticipate the content by asking the question first. So here's what Amy and I are going to cover. In sort of our first block, we're going to be talking about creating core messaging. Sort of what problem are you solving? This is sort of the product market fit. That's the first bucket. We could spend an entirety on that first bucket alone, but that's what we're getting to, creating core messaging and creating the documentation that's going to be the core foundation for all your marketing and communications plans. That deals with differentiators and consistency. Amy's going to talk more about that. The second bucket is generation or lead demand or creating awareness and demand for your product. So it's sort of, we will also cover who's responsible for what in your tiny little corporation where you're probably wearing multiple hats. We will talk about industry relations, investor messaging, and some sort of PR to create awareness. Again, spend all day on that one. The third is a bucket about sort of budgeting and tools, how to create the structure or infrastructure for your marketing efforts. And that's related to 4, which is hiring the right person or people for your marketing team, sort of the first hire. That might be the only one that you're going to get to in your time with your company or your idea. And then finally, we're going to do this little lightning round. So that gives you a little bit of overview of what we're going to get to. So we're going to get right into it. So Amy, we're going to talk about creating the sort of core messaging. It's either a map for the organization, guidelines, identifying the problem you're trying to solve with your technology and the benefits it's going to bring to customers, and creating messaging around that value. So I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us more about that.
That's great. I appreciate that. And thanks for that whole setup, Terry. There are so many different things. And as we were talking through this in prep for this conversation, it's like this could go on for hours. So you'll have to stop me and or slow me down, because sometimes I tend to talk really fast when I get excited about topics like this. So what I would say from a core messaging perspective, it's sort of a practice that I've developed over time with the various different companies that I've worked with. What I find too often is that your message tends to evolve a lot. And one of the key tenets for really good marketing is that you're repeating the same message over and over and over again. So it really pays to get this right. So that's not to say there's not some trial and error as you go, but what I would say is a core message really needs to be so clearly, what problem are you solving? To who does that solve? Whose problem does that solve? Meaning, what is your market? What's your target audience? And what makes you different from other providers of that? So it tends to give context for especially innovators like yourselves. You need to actually sort of, the way the world works, right, is they want to fit you into a bucket, right? The world, your audiences want to fit you into a bucket of, do I really understand what this product is? Is it software? Is it hardware? What kind of problem does it fit into? So you're giving context to, here's the problem I'm solving, here's who it's for, and here's what's unique about us and why you would want to continue listening. So when you get to that core message that you're comfortable with, and it may be the message that you use to get your first seed money, or maybe the message you use to get your idea bought into, and it could be that you've already got that message and you just don't realize it. So whatever was worked for you, I would say keep working with it. And then add some supporting points as you get into some of the key features and benefits of this particular offering. What does it do differently than anybody else's? And really, when I say core messaging, it doesn't have to be a lengthy thing. It's just something that you probably should write down, so that every time you go to talk about your product and various different components in so many different ways, you're using that same set of messaging. It's the foundation for all of the other conversations that you have that are marketing related. And it changes, it might be able to change a little bit with regard to maybe the investor message is slightly different than maybe your PR message or than maybe your selling message. But for the most part, the core is exactly the same, and you would continue to reuse it. The other thing that I find is occasionally when people are brand new, they've got some interesting results that they've got. Maybe they've done some testing, they've done some discovery that gives them a result that would be really powerful. Don't be afraid to use that result. That numbers break through a lot of clutter. So I would say if you've got something that you think has proven out the value of your solution and it's numerical or quantifiable in some way, it's really key to include that in your core message, because it breaks through a lot of other messaging that sometimes is a little too vague. People really like specifics if they can get to it. The one thing I would say to avoid at all costs is to start in your core messaging to talk about how the product or the offering works. It really should be about the value that it brings, but not how it works. And in any business that I've ever worked in, that would, I would say, be the number one mistake I see people making, is talking too much about how. You're not trying to teach your audience how to use the product. You want to get them to really be in love with it first. you want them to be emotionally attached to your concept so that they are now engaged in it with you, and they're willing to carry your message to somebody else who might also be interested in it. So I think the key is sharing your passion in such a way that you create that emotional response that they remember you and they understand enough to repeat what your message is. That's where things start to really get interesting. So that's really kind of the concept of the core message. This literally could be 100 words. It might not be very much work at all, or it could be a lot of work if it really takes a lot of thought for you to get through, how do I really get to those 3 or 4 concepts?
Yeah, I think that I should step back and say I've been at Innovation Works more than a dozen years. I had a work anniversary. I just got a pop-up message the other day and I thought, oh my God, I can't tell them how long I've been there. But what I can say is I've seen hundreds, thousands, hundreds of companies. Amy's seen a lot of companies. The place where you need both consistency and you also need a little tailoring. You need a message that's flexible enough for you to tailor it for your 3 key audiences you're going to go after as a startup. And it could be all of the above at the exact same simultaneous time, or there could be some differentiator, but you're going to go through trying to be attractive to investors, to talent that you want to bring onto your organization, and to early customers. You frequently need some traction with early customers to be attractive to investors, but you also want to be taken seriously by potential talent that you're trying to attract to your organization. So you need a consistent message, as Amy said, talking about the value of your organization, and not necessarily till people's eyes glaze over with the how, which is, when we talk about benefits and features, so it's the heavy on the benefits, low on the features. Now, you may change that formula a bit if you're going to talk with an investor who really knows your area, or as we talk about later, Amy's going to talk about talking with analysts, frequently incredibly knowledgeable about your area of expertise. You may have to tailor that a little bit, but you need to think about early on, what are the messages going to be about the value of your organization to those 3 early audiences: customers, investors, and talent. Am I leaving anything out, Amy?
No, I think you're spot on. And I think that tends to be just minor tweaks to the message for those audiences, just remembering that in some cases you're actually asking someone to spend money. So it changes a little bit, right? Or are you asking them to actually be an early adopter of your product, or are you asking them to invest some money in the expectation of a return later? So minor modifications, but overall, I think you would get to that when you're in the conversation with them. But the key will be as you're creating your presentations or you're creating any sort of web copy, that you'd be making sure you're hitting those few key points over and over. And the one thing I've said to many of my marketing teams along the way is, we as an organization will be far more sick of the message than anyone else will be. And you have to say it so many, many times to get it to break through, especially now when almost all of the communication is digital and form. It takes even more messages of the same content to break through the clutter. And so it is really important to not change it up too often. It's easy to get distracted by, oh, somebody else has a really great idea. If you've got something that's been working, put that on the back burner, because there'll probably be a great time and place for that, but stay as consistent as you can.
And Amy, we didn't talk about this very specifically, but you did talk about creating that core messaging document in the startups where you've run the marketing. What does that look like, and who needs to buy into it before you start using it?
It's a great question. So some of it depends on how many people you have in your organization already, but I would say, it really is a Word document with one key message and maybe 4 or 5 supporting messages. And I've had my marketing teams use that even when we were tens of millions of dollars. This was a really key component of our business. So all the way from the time you're very early on until you're really scaling up. The people that need to be bought into that message are, of course, the people who are talking to your prospects. So if you've got a separate person doing your selling, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. some cases you're talking to yourself there, right? But if you've got a separate person doing your selling, they need to make sure that it's going to resonate with that audience. And then I would say any of your investors, it would be great to test it on them to see how they might respond to it, knowing that you're always at some point going to be looking for additional investors. And those two audiences, of course, are key from a revenue perspective. The other thing that could happen as we get into the awareness, you'll start to talk about industry analysts. And when you present to them, they could also give you feedback on messaging, which could be incredibly valuable because they're looking across the industry at the solutions that exist. And they may give you some pointers there that would tell you, wow, because they're looking across all of these different products, they could say, wow, you're differentiated in this way. Did you know that? Or have you thought about that in this way? So it's always good to continue to hear that kind of feedback. But I would say those are the audiences whom you want some buy-in. But then continue to reinforce, hey, we're not all creating our own set of messages here. We all need to be using the same thing.
So some words that I think people are familiar with, but may wonder where this all fits are branding, positioning, sort of what I call external branding, sort of your logo and all of those things. Where does this marketing messaging fit into? Is it the same as, or does it create your branding or your positioning?
The marketing message is probably the first thing you should do. So one of the things I see a lot of people doing is they get so focused on the look and feel and maybe the logo and maybe the name of the product, which all are interesting and of course, important tactics, not nearly as important as getting the right message, because that message actually tells them what to think about that look and feel. And so what I would say is those are all part of building the brand. It's the message and the logo and the colors that you use and all those other things are all important. The message probably is almost the 80-20 rule of 80% of this should be about the message and maybe 20% about the look of your logo and those kinds of things. So when you're spending time on these things, getting that message right is far more important than the look. And I would say all of these help to create the brand. And the real important part about the brand is the brand, you want a brand to create, the goal in ideal situation is that it creates an emotional response. I talked about that with the message, but I feel that way about the brand overall is that you want someone to create an emotional connection with your brand. For example, when we had Wombat Security, we had a wombat as our maybe mascot of our logo, and people loved it. It was very unusual in cybersecurity to have an animal attached to any sort of cybersecurity solution, and we made him look, kind of fierce. And so people were like, what is that? And then of course it created a whole bunch of discussion about what is a wombat, which is a whole different tangent I won't get down to. But I will tell you, is people created an emotional relationship with it. And after post-acquisition, we had people begging us to keep him and to keep the wombat going. That's the kind of situation you want to be in, so that people are like, wow, I love this brand so much, I want it to continue. And so think about things like that. Are there, if in your industry, how will you stand out from a brand perspective when you work on the messaging? Are there particular images or things like that that really are natural to your core message, and that so that they work together? But once again, message first and then look and feel second.
Yeah, and one thing that I would say before we sort of move on is that if you're at a pretty early stage in your project or your company's development, you may have already come up with a product name or assets, that logo that either cost money or you're attached to in some way. I totally agree. Amy is right. I think that the messaging is much more important. It's the sort of thing that you give to a designer or someone else as inspiration for your branding. Sometimes sometimes many teams put the cart before the horse, and they come up with a name or other kinds of assets that are important. I would challenge you to get these all on the same page, see if what you've created fits with that marketing message. You're possibly the only ones who are aware of these early assets. and you need to be willing to possibly let go of them for a better alternative, or a reinforcement of this is exactly right. All our messages align. Everything is beautiful and perfect. But sometimes early on, you're going to need that flexibility, because frequently naming, even pricing, other kinds of things that can happen early on so that you get some traction, it all needs to fall under this marketing message once you get it agreed to internally.
I think that's the only other point I would make to that. Thank you for that addition, Terry, is that nothing is forever. So even if you create a first brand or a look and feel or a logo that you're like, oh, I want to spend a lot of time on this because this is forever, don't think about it that way. It's much better to get something completed and stick with it for now, because you'll reach a different stage in the company where you want to rethink it, but you don't have to spend so much time on it that it's taking away from what you might need to do to finish your product or grow the business or some of those other things. So don't get something done and give it the good enough stamp and then move on to the next part, which could be very time consuming as well, but you never know. So I would say don't look for perfection there.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I'm ready to move on to the next section on awareness and demand generation. But Melanie, are you monitoring the chat? Because I'm really not. I don't know if we have any questions about that early marketing map or sort of core messaging document.
I don't see anything in the chat yet. But if anyone has a question right now, if you can raise your hand. Or
Justin just asked a question about how is this different for B2B versus B2C. So what I will say is all of my expertise has been in B2B. I would say for B2C, what I tend to see happening is B2B people tend to make their decisions based on their gut. B2C tends to do a lot of really great market research. You can do polling and some other things and really test your messaging with B2C and get quick answers very easily. That really kind of could guide you down a path, where I would say B2B, it's very taxing to do that in B2B because it'll be much harder to get responses. Your market's probably smaller. And so I would say the difference there in that approach would be test if you're in a B2C environment, and in B2B, you're going to have to listen to some of your stakeholders and maybe some of your early friendlies to get some advice from them, because I think the research part will be hard.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then we're going to move on. How important are roadmaps given that getting structure, oh, mine just disappeared. Getting structure during the start. How important are roadmaps given that getting structure during the start tends to be tough?
Roadmaps. So it's great. It's a great point, because as an innovator yourself, you probably have a vision for where you want to take the product, right? And so it is always great to have that plan and those phases of here's where we are today and here's where we want to take the product in the future. And that's so important, of course, to your investor discussions and maybe even into your early prospect discussions, so that you get buy-in and that they want to adopt you early and they want to be in early. So I would say you can have a very great visionary document that could, or I should say story that you can talk to people about without having incredibly detailed roadmaps. Maybe there are milestones or something you can point out, but I would say avoid getting into the details, because what you want to do is really paint the picture, but your path is going to take so many different turns along the way, you could never predict what I think the end game ends up being. So in a lot of detail, at least. So I would say paint the picture and then don't spend a lot of time on the detailed roadmap early on. That's my reaction. You might have a different one, Terry.
No, I would say that when we're presented with, as an investor, with early ideas to make a seed stage investment on, or even earlier at the accelerator stage, if you're so prescriptive that it doesn't seem like you're coachable, or that you can be flexible, or that you can anyway change this distinct, discrete roadmap, that can be a red flag that this may not be a company we can work with, as we are looking for a team we can help guide. Frequently, that's because we've seen something similar, maybe not in the same sector exactly, or the same industry or application, but it looks like something else. So we at InnovationWorks like to see a little bit more flexibility. So you do have to find that comfort point between a certain direction that you're all rowing toward, and also the capacity to move on feedback and product development. So we're going to talk about creating the demand for lead generation. And this is really the basis for your organic growth. It's also meeting KPI that investors are going to care about. And it's frequently a sign of traction that just about everybody is going to look for. Your other customers never want to be the first. Your team you're trying to attract wants to know you're solid and they're not jumping out of an existing job to something completely, a toss-up, could or could not be successful. Analysts want to know to take you seriously. So how do you start to generate that funnel?
It's a great question. One of the areas, and you touch on analysts, which is a special sweet spot for me because it's an area that doesn't require an investment other than your time, although I guess we could argue that your time is probably the most valuable thing that you have. What I would say is because of the viewpoint of industry analysts, I think it's so important to get that initial presentation that is using the core messaging and really talking about, here's my idea, here's what's innovative about this, here's the problem that it solves, here's how big the market is. And using that to have that conversation with industry analysts early on helps to create a lot of awareness. The reason why is industry analysts are talking to, if you select the right ones, are talking to your potential buyers. They're very influential and they're always looking for new technology. They want to talk about the latest, greatest things that are happening, and they're looking for really interesting startups to talk about. So you are exactly what they need to hear about in the marketplace. And so they will take your briefings and your time 30 minutes at a time for free. So you're spending 30 minutes with them, but they're then influencing part of the market. And you could find yourself showing up in a report, or you can find yourself being spoken about to other potential buyers very early on. So I'd say that's such an important component of awareness, is finding that right industry analyst who's covering your segment, maybe has already written research in a particular area that's very adjacent to yours or close to yours. Maybe have talked about some of the other organizations you think of as competitors, if there are any. So I would say definitely search for those first from an awareness perspective. And the other part of awareness is something really important, I think, is PR. So one of the areas where you really want to be able to do is create this umbrella of awareness, and PR does that so well because it's clearly not selling. You're using that core messaging we talked about to really make a market or an industry more aware of the value that you're bringing. So maybe some early research you've done, or maybe some other key findings that you've done would be interesting to a reporter to write about. In the past, as I've worked with early stage companies, and this is probably maybe a little further along than some of you are, I'd be looking for a very small PR firm or person who is really an expert in this particular market. They maybe already had relationships with media or with reporters in this particular industry, and they're eager to write. They tend to not be completely expensive, so it's good and you're getting a lot of attention from them. But having a plan for what announcements are we going to make, what are some of the key findings we've got, and really starting to get some articles written about you. And maybe even key bloggers would be great too. Getting some articles written about you so that there are more things for people to refer to and see are really key as well. So those are two, what I think to be very key awareness components. I would leave like digital advertising and some of those other things that tend to be kind of expensive and require a certain amount of expertise to much later in your marketing plan. But if you can focus on the PR and the industry analyst relations early on, you'll be surprised what a nice foundation that lays for you when you start to move towards lead and demand generation, because it makes it so much easier for you to sell if people might have heard your name or heard about you. And now you're just the second touch that they have with your brand.
Okay, I'm just looking at our notes. What other kinds of trade shows or conferences or other kinds of touch points do early stage companies often bounce up against? They've got their target audience all in one place. What's a good way to approach those opportunities?
Yeah, great question. I mean, now that we're sort of coming out of the pandemic and trade shows and conferences are coming back, one of the things that I've seen to be really effective is, of course, a trade show can be a very expensive proposition, but a way to ease into that could be submitting your content for a presentation in a thought leadership way. This can't be a sales pitch. It has to be about a concept or about research or about something really of the problem that you're solving, really, honestly. And so if you submit presentations about the problem you're solving and you get a presentation, once again, it adds to your awareness, but it also gets you in front of your target audience for those early and continuing discussions. It can be a less expensive way to go to market than I'm going to go all in on a trade show and I'm going to then have to have an exhibit and booth staff and marketing collateral and a whole lot of other committed resources that are going to be time consuming. And that's not to say that those aren't really important at some point, but then even when you do select a trade show and you say, okay, I really feel like I need to exhibit, be super selective. It's really easy for your trade show list to suddenly become obligatory. Oh, well, we went to that last year and the year before, so we should keep going to this. Every one of these, you should come back with metrics that help you understand what value did I really get from that event and should I do it again? Be very careful about anything that starts to feel like, well, just because we did it last year, because it's a great way to burn through a lot of time and resources if it's not delivering return to you. But of course, trade shows and exhibits are really just one mechanism. Your website is probably an even more important component of your marketing plan and probably one of the most important things to do early, because once you start to build that awareness, the next thing someone's going to do is they're going to look for your website and understand what more they can learn about you. So that's the other good reason not to get into this trade show exhibit piece early, because it's so time consuming and it is the very highest cost per lead that you can have as a trade event. Whereas a website, your cost per lead is much lower. So the key would be trying to drive people back to your website to learn more about what you do. And therefore that can be somewhat more, not just the problem you solve, but a little bit more about how it works. And that's where you can start to get into that discussion because they're going to want to really understand your offering a little bit better.
And I think that we talked about, this may also be one step further down the road, but webinars or web calls that you have for either multiple analysts or potential customers. So can you talk a little bit about that, Amy?
Absolutely. I mean, I found that to be, number one, super inexpensive way to drive a lot of activity. The key for the webinar piece, though, of course, is to have a good core database to market it to first. So hopefully you found a source for your target audience and how to get more information about them. Be really careful about selecting that list of people and make sure it's a really good quality list. There's a lot of people on the internet that try and sell you a list. Don't buy any of those. I would go to a really good trade organization and see if they would help you use a list that they have and if there's a way to do that. But then, so that's what you're using to market your webinar. And then your webinar, once again, very similar to that trade show presentation, should really be about the problem you're solving and not specifically how your product works. So how are you uniquely solving a problem that you know exists with your target audience? I would say I've had great experience with those being about 45 minutes long, about 30 minutes of content, 15 minutes for questions. If you have an early adopter who might co-present with you, or if there are others in industry who might present with you, would be really great to build credibility with that. But the key is that high-level message, not trying to sell in that, but really just helping them understand what problem you solve, because if you're solving a problem they have, they will come to you.
Yeah, I think that dovetails with what Kit put in the chat. And this is also the key to public relations or PR. PR is not an opportunity for you to sell. And no media message, no writer or editor could care less about you selling, but that doesn't preclude you from talking about the benefits of your product or even reiterating your key message. In fact, you should have your key message and some examples of it in your back pocket and get it into the conversation no matter what kind of question you're asked, because when you get to the end of the interview, you don't want to hang up and then think, crap, I should have talked about X, Y, and Z. So you need to know your own core messages inside and out. They need to be top of mind. And as Kit says here, you know, you're the only one for whom selling your product actually matters. Your potential customers and everyone who hears about you or from you wants to hear, what problem are you solving? Who is this for? What are the benefits that are going to be derived from this? Is it faster, cheaper, stronger, higher? You know, all of those things, the how is definitely of interest if you're selling scientist to scientist. If you're selling into like a hospital organization where you need a dual track, you need the CFO, you need the financial people to say it's a go, and you need the people who are actually going to use the product to say it's a go. Frequently, you need those technical folks to funnel up to the financial folks. We need this. So sometimes you're selling to other users or scientists who want to know the how, but you frequently need someone to make the buy decision who has the more 30,000 foot picture. Would you agree?
Absolutely, great point. And to the point even that Kit put in there is having, if you've got a really solid champions who have been helping you with your business or are early adopters, if they're willing to take the lead in some of these areas, that you will really make much more traction more quickly. The key will be being very careful with how much you ask for that, because you'll probably wear out your welcome very quickly, right? But you just be very judicious about how you do that. But I agree, that's the great starting point there.
Here's one question, and then we'll get to the sort of budgeting and tools and also hiring. What are pitfalls in doing co-marketing early on through the channel? Not an indirect sales model, but co-marketing specifically to drive awareness. So Justin, let me just make sure I understand this. So co-marketing with an already established brand or company, and who's either using your product and you're co-marketing together. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, because Talk2 is a self-management app, right? We don't have the traditional B2B, like our ACV is just too low. So the idea is, can we use the channel to kind of distribute, and based on the partners, can we use their established brand? Like for example, if we work with a school, if a school is a partner, can we use their existing social channels and stuff to reach, the ICP, which would be the parents and their kids?
Well, I have an enthusiastic answer to that, but I'm going to let Amy go first on that.
I mean, I think it's a great way. It gives you credibility to be aligned with an existing brand that's already in that market and talking to that audience. But then don't expect them to carry the message too far. So you're still going to have your own brand support, your own website, your own types of things. I think with every indirect approach, there should always be a direct approach so that you've established your own brand experience. Some of what you lose control of when you co-market is you're losing some control of your message, because when it gets to somebody who's talking about you, it'd be a great place to give them your core messaging document and say, here's what I'd really like you to say, but it will not be probably as clean or crisp as what you will do yourself. And channel partners come and go. So what I would also say is that's really almost the 20-80 rule, in that 20% of your partners will do great work for you and 80% of them could end up being a waste of your time. So you have to be really careful about that, knowing that you're going to have some consistent brand to come back to all on your own when some of those channel partners just don't work out and the co-marketing doesn't work as you anticipated. Does that make sense?
So I'm going to put my PR hat on. That's always the flip side in an organization where you have some heft and you have both a public relations side or communication side and a sort of marketing side and a sales side, which frequently when you're a startup, these are all smushed together. They're all different disciplines and you need different information, but it's frequently the same person wearing all hats. But from a PR side, co-marketing is really powerful because you're letting someone who has an established place in the market, you're coasting on them. You're getting the halo effect from, yeah, I've got these connections and I can call up, you know, such and such a trade publication or a general business publication, and we can get a story placed. Ed, you are totally right that your own individual message is going to take a back seat. Sometimes that can be worth the trade-off. Like you have a major investor who's going to announce a round in you. If Sequoia Ventures was going to invest at a later round, you know, I don't expect that InnovationWorks is going to make it in your press release that we were your early seed funding. The news is about this big ass investor who's behind you. But Sequoia is going to, their PR people are going to drive the message. That could be still very beneficial to you because it's creating awareness and a sense of demand before you're really able to do that on your own. So I agree. It's a mixed bag, but it's probably worth the calculated risk, especially when you're very early stage.
But it can't be your only go-to market because
Right.
I think there is some risk attached to that. And if suddenly it doesn't work, you've lost a lot of time and not made progress when you needed to. I think that would be and this is the hard part, of course, because it's like, oh, great, now I have to do both. That is the hard part about taking a channel partner marketing strategy is you're supporting the channel partner and it takes a heavy touch. You're in front of them every week. You're having conversations with them every week. You're supporting their sales organization potentially. You're really creating materials just for them in some cases. And so I think it's a pretty heavy lift to make sure that it's actually engaging. You can't just send some stuff over the wall and expect it to work. You really have to be motivating them to talk about you. And that's hard actually in some cases.
Yeah. And it can be a time frame that is very tough for you to sustain as an early stage organization. Because if they've got a corporate arm involved, corporate PR, corporate marketing, whatever, and you've got to have a lot of people sign off on that, you're nimble and can move, you want to move tomorrow. A bigger corporate or multi-level organization, it's going to be a lot slower. Again, sometimes it's worth it and sometimes it seems worth it, but when you really start to unpeel that onion, it's like, oh, this is not going to be a good move for our early stage company to put the resources toward.
You're just gonna, pardon the expression, you're gonna kiss a lot of frogs along the way too, because there's maybe gonna be some initial excitement from that partner and you're thinking, oh, this is gonna be great. And then suddenly it goes away and you don't know why, and nobody knows why. And there's so many of them that don't get traction. So the key is if you find even a couple of salespeople who are engaged too, you do that co-marketing and you have one salesperson calling you all the time for more information. That's great. Make sure you give them a lot of your attention because they're your now brand ambassador really and trying to carry you to market. So there are some great things that can come from it, but it's, I would say you still need to have your own parallel path.
Okay, one last question before we move on.
Terri, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but Jody had asked a question before Kit's comments. I just didn't want to, I wanted to make sure we missed that.
Oh, I'm so sorry, I missed that. Okay. On industry analysts? Mm-hmm. Okay, don't industry analysts usually cover more established or even publicly traded companies? How would we get their attention? That's a great question.
It is a great question. I can jump in. I will tell you, I think that's a little bit of a misunderstanding about industry analysts. While they do cover publicly traded companies, they always have to talk about innovation. Otherwise, their advice is becoming stale really quickly. So they need you and what you're seeing in the market as much as you need them. So anytime I have asked for a briefing from a brand new company, I've been able to achieve it because they really want to understand what's going on in the industry. So don't discount yourself too quickly. They really do need to understand what's happening from an innovation perspective. And they've heard the stories from the publicly traded companies over and over again, and they know what they're getting there. And they've probably got their finger on the pulse of that. They're going to carve out time for innovation. So definitely don't be shy about that. The worst they can do is not get back to you or say no, but there's likely to be multiple analysts. And if you can make traction and create a relationship with one, you can really make some great progress. And then the other part of that, I guess I forgot to mention before, is get in front of them. If you get good traction, get in front of them every 6 months with an update. It's only 30 minutes of your time. It's probably, you can probably use your investor presentation with your analyst to something very close to it. So it's not a lot of extra content that you need to create, but put it on your calendar and get in front of them again and reach out again in 6 months. That relationship can bear amazing fruit. My personal experience was I started working with Gartner when I was part of Wombat, and that my lead analyst, who was a terrific man, wonderful, totally understood us, said, we're never going to do a magic quadrant. And if you've been in other businesses, you know what a magic quadrant, he said, we're never doing a magic quadrant, which really lays out all the vendors on this particular segment. It's never going to happen. It wasn't even 18 months later where they put out a magic quadrant and we were in the second leadership position because we had continued to work with them. So the market grew fast and we were in a leadership position right out of the gate, and we were almost completely unknown at that point, but he knew that we had a lot of value. So that Gartner is a whole nother conversation I could spend an hour on, but what I would say to you is they will continue to pay attention to, even if you're not writing them a check. So don't be shy about some of these analysts.
Okay, we'll take the last question. I'm seeing we're at the 1 hour mark and we've got related 1.5 buckets. So we want to get to that as well. So just keeping track. The question is, what are effective ways to use market channel marketing to build customers and users? I'm a little fuzzy on that one, but Amy's shaking her head. So here we go.
Yeah, the multi-channel marketing piece is really important. So one of the things that the ways that you can organize your marketing activities, and it is really important, I maybe can blend a couple of these buckets together. Because as you're building your budget, one of the things that you may want to do is think about the way you want to go to market. Maybe there are 3 key problems that your product solves. You could look at that and say, well, I'm going to have 3 key themes that I want to talk about throughout the year, each quarter. So one quarter, I'm going to talk about problem 1. Next quarter, I'm going to talk about problem 2, and so on. So that way you're giving each message a lot of great attention. That means, okay, well, maybe the trade shows that are happening in the first quarter, I really want to focus on this key problem that it solves. And then I'm going to make sure that if I write a blog post, it's about that problem and solution. And then if I talk to a reporter, it's about that. And then maybe if I go to a trade show, my presentation is about that. Or maybe if I'm doing some email marketing, my email is about that. So that's sort of the multi-channel marketing piece that is so important. Is it's not just each component that matters, it's the addition of the components, because it's truly the 1 + 1 = 3. The more different channels that you use to market your message, the more traction you will get. And so that's really key. But you can organize your work so much so that you are not having to recreate brand new content for every step of your campaign. Create that content up front, the key messages about that problem solution, and then reuse them through the campaign. That can also help you build your budget. So you can build a budget at the beginning of the year talking about each of those themes, and then you have a plan already worked out for the year. And the key here would be not to be too reactionary. It's so easy to have suddenly a little bit of interest from a particular prospect and go off in a brand new direction. It's great to have that to inform maybe your next campaign, but stay the course. It's really easy to get distracted, but then you lose the momentum you were building. So those are the things that I think about when I think about the planning part of it, and the budgeting part of it. Is it's going to take a little bit of marketing money to get real traction. Some of the best experiences I had early on were working with a co-founder or CEO who understood marketing enough to say, if I've got an extra 50 cents, pardon the expression, it's probably more like $1,000, but if I've got extra little bit of money, I'm going to put it into marketing, because I know that that's going to help me get the message out and bring in more opportunities for the business. And so think about the way you budget that way. Is if suddenly you come across a situation and maybe you had some opportunities close you didn't expect, don't be afraid to reinvest that back into marketing.
So that is a perfect segue, Amy, into the discussion about budgeting and tools. So I'm just going to make you go a little deeper in that discussion, because when you're a startup, you know, everything's on a shoestring. Even if you have some very early investment, that has to go toward possibly developing the prototype, if not, building out the product. It's got to go to paying the team. It's got to go toward, it's got to go pretty far. So how, recognizing that your budgeting needs to be something not zero, how do you establish that in a pre-revenue company?
It's a great question. I mean, and it's not an easy one to answer. This comes back to that understanding your target audience really well and being so selective about the things that you choose to do. So sometimes there are people who, knowing that you're starting a business, might say, hey, would you like to do X, Y, or Z? And maybe it's a community effort, but it might not be purely focused on your target audience. That might be one I would set aside and be more focused on something that is more focused on pure target audience. So the key here is reducing as much waste as possible when you make your selections, meaning you don't want to reach too broad of a market with people who might not be interested. So for example, if someone were to say, come to you from a trade magazine that really covers IT in general, that might be a waste when you're really solving something that's a problem related to AI or robotics, if that makes sense. So knowing that so many of you are in healthcare, you think about the American Medical Association is massive. That might not be a place you want to go with your product, knowing you're solving such a small, more specific problem in each of these cases. So think about how to find your target audience and make sure that there are as many of them in that situation as possible, and try not to go overly broad because you're probably going to overspend and it might not be the best use of your money. And then do you want me to continue to talk about tools next?
Yes.
So from a tools perspective, this is really interesting. I mean, of course, there's a lot of great tool sets out there from a marketing tech stack perspective. And when I say that, I do mean that you actually almost need a marketing technologist these days, or marketing ops is such an important role. And you might not see that being talked about too much, but it's always there in a more established business, that there's somebody that's paying attention to what's happening to the flow of leads, which leads are really progressing through the sales process. So you want to think about those tools and your selection of those tools. So sticking as mainstream as possible is really important. So the best brand, especially if your goal is a successful exit or an acquisition, because that acquiring company is going to want to know you're using technology that they also know and use. That makes the integration of your business that much easier. Also makes it much more appealing to them, because it's something that they understand and they wouldn't have to spend a lot of extra time on. So think about things like Google Suite. Really well known, has a lot of great technology these days, really supports on Google Analytics and tags, and helps you understand flow. That's a great suite of products for both your email and some of your other activities, your website and some of those other things. The other thing to consider is HubSpot. That's an application that I've been engaged with in various different forms. You can start off very small, but you can do almost everything end to end with that one piece of technology or software. So those are some areas to think about. Is you don't want to, this is an area we don't really want to make a short-term decision, because the cost of switching is enormous to you as an entrepreneur. So think about selecting something that is very mainstream, that maybe lets you come in at a low price so that you don't have to spend too much too early, but then will grow with you as you grow your business.
I think we talked about Salesforce as being another ubiquitous way to be a CRM. It is expensive, but it is universal. There are other tools, Streak. There are lots of other kinds of smaller CRM tools. It may be part of your plan. We're going to use this inexpensive tool or free tool until we get to this stage, and then we're going to make the leap. And we cannot get too big on that, because then it's too many records either to dump into a new system, or it's got to be a system that accepts records from. And frequently you can find all of those things, but you should have a strategy as you mature, and you have to reach more, either sales targets or people in the email list or other customers or things you're tracking, but have in your mind a goal to get to some of these more universally accepted platforms that are going to make you easy to both work with, adopt, and ultimately be acquired if that's part of your plan.
Absolutely. And the one thing is, so Salesforce is a double-edged sword. I would say it's very well known, but also can get pricey fast, because my experience with it is, if you use it out of the box and you don't try to customize it, you'll be great. But if you try to do any sort of customization, now suddenly you have to hire a consultant, and they're hard to find. And now you've got a lot of expensive big projects. So while they're well known, there's a lot of baggage, I think, that comes a little bit along with them. So just walk into that carefully, and probably the best scenario is to use it out of the box as is, as much as you can. And then I saw the chat in here, which I appreciate. Yeah, so somebody else said that too. They tried Salesforce, it was complicated and expensive. I completely agree. It's almost too much product for an early stage company, in my opinion. And I don't think they've done a great job of getting ready for small business and being accessible to small business. HubSpot, I think, built their business that way. They're a little bit better. I think there are a few others. There's a knockoff of Salesforce, that's Zoho, that I've used at another startup that actually was pretty good to use too, and maybe didn't have all of that other extra stuff that Salesforce had. So just be careful about that decision, I think, is the only comment.
So Jody's comment in the chat is useful, that CMU has a relationship with HubSpot, and so that you can leverage that. Also, if you get accepted into a credible, high quality accelerator program like the Alpha Lab programs that we offer, or there's some others, Techstar programs. Some of these large networks of accelerators, we're part of the Global Accelerator Network, they already have a number of relationships that you can leverage, like Rackspace for your server, HubSpot for some of your communications and customer relationship management. Many, if you're like a hardware company, Alpha Lab Gear and others have relationships with some modeling software, some very expensive and specific software you're going to need a subscription to, where all the companies in Alpha Lab Gear have a subscription to that platform. So if the next stage for you that you're thinking about is an accelerator, frequently, in addition to the money, the seed funding that you're going to get, you're also going to get access to these perks and platforms, which can add up to thousands of dollars for you in your pocket. So it can be worth investigating. Let's see. So we were going to talk a little bit about hiring the right marketing person, or that first hire. What should either the CEO or the team, or, if you're an exec wearing multiple hats, what are you looking for in a marketing person or team?
On that one, this is an area where I think it's really important to hire don't go and hire someone that's too junior, because I think this particular person that you bring in is setting the foundation for the rest of your marketing. So if you hire the person that can then hire more people under them and then manage them, you'll be set up to scale. What I have seen too many businesses do is that they've hired a marketing person who might not have had experience in their industry, or who might not have enough experience at their size of business. And if there is a person that's not a fit there, it's really set you back a lot time-wise. So think a little bit about make sure that it's a very like product. For example, when I was searching for employees, I wanted them to come from, because I was doing so much marketing in software, I wanted them to come from software. So many other types of business are too different. If it was services or if it was hardware, it's just a very different animal. So think a little bit about the skills and the understanding of the type of product you have, and then think a little bit about the market. If they already understand the market, then of course it's so much easier. The uptime of a marketing person to learn your market and understand the unique, I would say, characteristics of the market is significant. It could be, they really, to be effective, almost have to go through an entire annual cycle to fully understand in some cases. So be really careful, lean towards somebody with, I would say, at least 10 years of experience, if not 15, somebody who maybe has managed people before and has been in a startup and in that market. I realize that I made that sound really hard, but this particular hire is such an important hire, and the wrong hire can set you back for years. And I've inherited businesses that have made a bunch of wrong hires along the way. And it really, in some cases, really slows down their growth.
Yeah, this is a tricky one because I think as a startup, you have a chance to create a diverse team right from the get-go, which is everybody's dream, right? So you get the best operations advice, you get the best reach into new markets and insight into how you could tweak your product to be attractive to a new market or altogether new products. There's a lot of reason to think that diversity is the best operation for your startup to grow. And experience is also going to be a balancing act. And you'll need to think early on about your HR strategy. Human resources is a strategy, marketing is a strategy, public relations is a strategy, everything's a strategy, fundraising, obviously. Many things you may be thinking about, the product development roadmap is clearly a strategy, but all these other things are worth the early team's focus because that blend is your long-term success.
Yeah, and as much as you can hire people you believe want to be with the business for a long period of time, the better off you can be. That any sort of transition just takes a toll. And the other thing always in an environment like yours where you're doing things that are so innovative, it's innovative and there's an innovative window, right? And so you don't want to burn through a lot of time because at some point someone else is going to have your same great idea, and it's not too hard if you've already created a path for them to catch up to you. And that can suddenly slow your growth too. So I mean, those are all things to think about of how do you make those right selections so that you're making the best use of time and you're taking advantage of a market opportunity.
So I realize we've got a little less than 15 minutes left. So I want to go deeper into one area, and then if I see any other questions come up or we'll hold those last minutes for questions, we will. But let's go back to how do you find or put together that early email list to reach a market? We talked about trying to partner up with trade associations, but let's go a little deeper. How, I mean, nobody gives you anything for free. So how do you structure, how do you make the ask? What are you asking for? And what are you offering up? And then what are you doing with it?
That's an area it's an interesting question. I've taken a couple of different paths with this. I would say in some cases it is those trade events and those people you have conversations with at the trade events who you know you are in your target audience and you're using that to build your list because you've had conversations with them. That's kind of a slow path though, honestly, right? Because how many of those are you doing at once and how big can your list get that way? It's going to take a while to build that. The other part is occasionally you can, when you attend some of these events, they were willing to give you the registration list. So maybe you think about sponsorships that allow you to get the registration list of people that are very targeted to your audience and look at that as an asset or potential opportunity to bring that in. So I think that now that events are back, that's a much easier way to start to build the list with the right people. The other ways to build lists, I think are much more expensive, to your point, Terri. I've worked with companies like ZoomInfo, who has one of the industry's leading databases of just people in general. And they've really built it from a lot of different acquisitions. It's a pricey approach though. And that's one of those maybe aspirational goals in the future, is to use that as a database where you can look at the entire organization, understand functional roles, and know what kind of projects they're working on. That might be where you want to get to, but that's a later stage investment. In the short term, it's a lot about having those conversations and maybe looking for sponsorships where they'll give you a list that helps you build that database. And then it's the re-engagement with them as you start to build it, and make sure there's sort of a forward to a friend feature so that they can pass it along to their colleagues.
I think your very early adopters, if you've got a good relationship, ask them where their eyeballs are. You know, what do they read? Who do they go to for advice on business decision-making in their industry? They frequently help you build your media list. They help you build your email list. If you have good relationship with those early customers. I recognize it's all chicken and the egg. Well, how do you get those early customers? But your very early relationships, it could be, some time with who are your business advisors or mentors. It may be your attorney, accountant, whatever. Now, their time is not inexpensive, but they may have other business relationships that they can pass you along to. But somewhere in your sort of mentor or affinity group, be asking those folks, where in this industry segment do people get their information to make buy decisions? And that's where you want to put your focus. That's the same with, I don't necessarily want to be in Fortune magazine, but I do want to be in this industry trade mag, which might be an online source. But that's really where people who make the decision to buy my product, where they get their information. And you probably saw that, Amy, in the SaaS businesses that you've been in.
Without question, those particular trade publications. And then if you find one that you think is really a sweet spot for your audience, and people have brought it up many times, don't be afraid with, I'm going to make an investment and maybe do a sponsorship or something with them, and go all in with that one. Because the more you can spend with that one provider, the more influence you're having with that provider, and you might find PR coming along and article placements and some other things might all come along. So instead of spreading it around in really small buckets, make a calculated risk decision and say, I'm just going to go all in with this one provider because my audience is saying repeatedly that's where they go. And what I find from a marketing perspective is, if you spend just a little bit of money in 12 areas, it's not nearly as impactful as spending a little bit more money in one.
Yeah, agreed. I think a lot of what we've talked about is applicable to B2C. We would just be swapping out the word analyst for influencer, or, we're really talking about a strategy to get to those who have their finger on the pulse of what your market is doing. So that's they're either users, they may be analysts, they may be media covering that sector, or they may be consumer influencers on the consumer side. I think that Kit has a good comment about it, that the people who have the problem you're solving, you're building an early relationship with those folks, and they're the ones to contact to keep building out the list of others who are trying to solve the same problem. And Kit goes on to say, Amy, can you tell us the first 3 or 4 things that you did when you started working for Wombat?
Well, actually, I've already covered so many of those because I found that they've worked in even in follow-on conversations and businesses that I've been helping. So I would say first 3 to 4 things was, we had a PR firm that was already been selected, so I continued to work with them. That they were selected right before I joined. So I worked with them, and they were a small boutique firm, just as I was suggesting, who were focused particularly on my target audience. So really key there. So PR, analyst relations was something we did right out of the gate, just as I was suggesting. Those were really key. And then those trade events. So thankfully, Joe was really interested in not shy about making big investments in marketing. So when a key trade event came up, we made an investment, which was a really expensive one. It was like a $12,000 conference for a single day conference, big investment. But we got 2 or 3 of our first deals from that one conference because there was so much interest in our product. And then he was more than happy to continue to take that investment and grow it and continue to add more of those conferences in. So we had a big trade conference budget in that business. And then we used those trade conferences to continue to build the list. So just to give context, we were only about $100,000 in revenue when we started behaving like that. That's probably sounds like light years away from where you are right now, but that's sort of where we were very early when we were starting to do some pretty big investments there. And that part of that is having established, to give credit to Joe, having established CEO that fully appreciates the power of investing in marketing to help grow the business.
I would also just remind all of you that you're already aligned with a group that has deep relationships, and that's Carnegie Mellon. So I'd spend some time with Melanie and Kit and plumb them, if you haven't already, for relationships both on campus and with Reed, and also with Randy. You know, who can they get you to? How can they help to establish some early credibility? The CMU brand has a lot of credibility with investors, with analysts, and with the media. So you're sitting on some very early contacts.
If I could speak to that for just 1 second, Terry, about the power of the CMU brand. Because Wombat was a CMU spin out, I will tell you, we kept that in our deck even 7 years into our growth. The amount of credibility that comes along with saying that you've come from CMU is massive. It is a global brand. It has credibility around the world. There's not a single person we ran into that didn't perk their eyes up and go, oh, really, Carnegie Mellon? It absolutely opens doors. Do not be shy about your origins or your roots, and make sure you're using that, because it was instrumental in getting a lot more attention.
Yeah, so we have just a few minutes left. So are there any other questions we didn't get to?
I don't see any additional questions in the chat. Yeah, I don't see anyone's hand raised. But I think, yeah, you did such an excellent, both of you did such an excellent job with throughout. Oh, here we go. Here's one from Justin.
Yeah, KPIs. Yeah, so initial SLAs or KPIs we've seen implemented. I would say you want to start to think about how, as quickly as you can, understand what kind of activities you did that drove to your first win or to your investments. So as we talked a little bit about the tech stack, the one nice thing about building the right tech stack is if you're with one single piece of software, you have complete visibility from the time you get a lead till the time you close your business. And that way you can know exactly where to continue to reinvest. And so from a KPI perspective, I was constantly looking at the leads that came in, how many of them converted, and how many of them converted to multiple stages in the sales process, and then how many won. And so we were diligent about that from the very beginning of our business. What was the lead source from? How well did those convert? And I was looking at that even annually as I was building my next year's budget. So I'd look back and say, if this particular trade event or if this particular marketing activity didn't convert anything, I took it right off the list and we're going to move on to something that was converting. We put all of our money into things that worked. I mean, it's very common sense, of course. But sometimes, like I said, that was the part I was talking about obligatory things. Be very careful about getting into situations that feel obligatory but are not driving revenue for you. And while I love the power of the community, sometimes people will ask for your time and you can't always afford to give it because it might not actually, and you know this, it might not be to your target audience, in which case it's not going to deliver a return for you. And so we were always, as we got requests for things, very judicious about who we were spending our time with from a community, you know, an investment community perspective, and where we were saying yes and maybe where we were saying no. So sometimes it was, can you do a poster presentation to this audience, which I know was not really my target audience? Maybe not this year. How about next year? You know, so sometimes those were things where we were just trying to be careful, because if it wasn't about growing the business, we were probably wasting some time. And that it might sound a little bit harsh, but you have to find ways to stay focused, because there will always be more asks on your time as an entrepreneur than you have time to give.
I would say the flip side also to that is investors, if that's part of your target audience, often have either somewhere on their blog or somewhere in their website, something that they've written or talked about, which reveals what KPI they're looking for, or they're explicit about it. More and more investors are very explicit. You have to hit this level of, you need to know what it costs to acquire a customer, what it costs to keep a customer, and you need to know, you have to be a certain level of business to meet our profile, has to be, you know, X number of millions of dollars before we'll even look at you, in which case, you know, whether to either take them off the list right now, put them on the list for later down the road, or take them off the list altogether. But frequently investors are very explicit about the KPI that they're looking for.
And then if we're to be selfish a little bit from a marketing perspective, KPI, we looked at marketing qualified leads that were generated. We looked at number of deals that made it into the sales funnel. And then we looked at closed won and closed lost. And then we also looked at customer retention rates. But of course, all analysts in the sort of recurring revenue SaaS business is going to be looking at how many of those customers do you keep and what's the cost there. So they have very high expectations that customer retention in a SaaS business has got to be almost 95% for them to be happy. So there are particular KPIs that we were looking at that way, if that helps answer your question a little bit more.
So we are at the close, and I'm going to guess that Amy would say the same. Not only has it been a pleasure, but I'm happy to continue to answer questions by email. I think both Melanie and Kit have our contact information, or if you just want to go to the InnovationWorks website, I'm Glueck at innovationworks.org. I'd be happy to follow up with any of you.
And same for me, my email address is actually right here, so you can see that asbaker@othot.com. So I'm always happy to respond and help. I just love working with the Pittsburgh tech community and understanding and learning and meeting brand new entrepreneurs and learning about their innovations. Honestly, it's really incredible. This is how Pittsburgh has really made it to the map, in my opinion, from a technology commercialization perspective. And so I'm always happy to talk to people if there's any way that I can help at all.
Well, thank you both so much. Thank you for taking your time today and also offering to be a resource for our teams moving forward. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
And then before we sign off, I just wanted to, Kit, I'm sorry I didn't allow you. I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to mention, maybe about the Start Smart we have coming up, or.
Yes, usually we don't do much programming in once the semester is over, but we had such great news for anybody who's here on an F1 visa about, I guess, the continuation or the blockages to a fabulous program. So I encourage you, even if you yourself do not have a visa issue, you might want to attend because you might want to hire some people who would benefit from this. It's called the parole program. And typically the lawyers have not been happy with having this taped, so I can't save it. It's so that they can be as frank and honest as they can. So it is, I don't have the date right in front of me.
The 22nd, it's next Tuesday at 4 p.m.
4 p.m.
Mm-hmm. I can put the link in the, I can actually just email the link.
Yeah, and I think it's also going to be in the weekly bulletin.
Yes.
So you can register. So.
Yeah. So, okay, great. Thank you. All right, well, thanks everyone. Appreciate everyone attending today. And
I just one more thing too.
Oh, sure.
I forgot to say, Olympus has been approved to actually open up. We are accepting teams back in. We're limited by the number of people that can be there at any one particular time. But if you're looking for working space for the summer, please do contact me. We do have some space that's available.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, everyone. Well, have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.